What is up, guys? Hopefully, you're enjoying your weekend, spending some time with your family, the ones that you love. I'm really appreciative that you took a few moments of your time to spend a little time with the Deck Talking Devil. Hey, if you haven't already, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, turn on those notifications so the next time there's a new video, you'll be the first to know. Well, since we last spoke, uh, I made a video about the key to all religions. If you haven't watched that video, I highly suggest you go back and watch it because it'll give some context into what I'm about to get into now. So, one thing that troubled me when I was a Christian is the problem of sin. Sin. We all know the three-letter word sin, sin. And we used to always say that sin was something in our nature, something in our nature that propelled us, or compelled us rather, to do evil. If you read the 7th chapter of the book of Romans, you get into this diatribe where Paul's kind of having this internal conflict about how he want to do good, he want to do things that are right, but every time he tries to do that which he knows is good, evil is present, and he ends up doing the evil that he does not want to do. And he talked about the war of his mind, warring against the law of God and all of this stuff. And, sin is very perplexing. But what is sin? You ask anybody, any believer, uh, and in this case, I'm not necessarily talking about a Christian believer, but any believer in sin, anyone who believes that there's such a thing as sin, you ask them what sin is, and you get a wide array of answers. There's no clear meaning to sin. You know, when I was coming up in the church, for instance, anything could be considered a sin. And I mean anything. Playing a game of cards was considered sin. Playing the lottery was considered sin. Going to carnivals or state fairs, women wearing a swimsuit, all of this stuff, wearing makeup was considered sin. All of this stuff we were taught. Now, this back in the 90s when religion, was hardcore. Uh, Now it's so contemporary that pretty much everything you see done in the church today, if you could rewind back to the 90s, the church of the 90s would have condemned the church of today and said that everything they doing is sin. All right, so it's not really any clear indication of what sin is. Then you get a more sound or logical definition where they say, well, sin is to do anything against the law of God, to violate the law of God. So, what's the law of God? Because when you talk to Christians, they seem to think that the law of God is basically the Ten Commandments, as if He only gave 10. It was about 613 commandments that He actually gave. And the majority of Christians don't know the other 603. They only know those 10. And so when you talk about the law of God, they don't even know the law. Uh, They're not even familiar with what the law is. And so, how can I be guilty of sinning when I'm not even aware of what I'm not supposed to do? How can I avoid doing it if I'm not made aware that I'm not supposed to do it? Uh, so the issue of sin is something that I take issue with, and here's why. What was the first sin? In the comment section, if you know, let me know what was the first sin. Now, most of you will probably go back and go to the book of Genesis and say, okay, the first sin was when Adam and Eve bit off of the bit of the fruit, whatever the fruit was. We'll just call it a mango, just to be on the safe side. When they ate the mango, this was the first sin. They disobeyed God's implicit instructions. Do not eat the fruit from this tree. And they ate the fruit. That was the first sin. And so in the New Testament, I want to say in Hebrews, they start saying things like, through one man, sin entered the world. All right. And through his act, sin entered the world, and sin was then passed down to every person after that. So, since the first sin was committed by this one man, God could have punished the man and left it there. All right, you sinned this one time. All right, it's not like Adam was a habitual sinner. He was not a sinner. He sinned one time. And if you know anything about theology, we don't consider a person who sinned once a sinner. A sinner is someone who practices a life of sin, who has no remorse for their sin, who even takes pleasure in sin. The man who sinned once is not really a sinner in the theological, from a theological perspective. He is a man who has sinned and is in need of forgiveness, but we don't classify this person as a sinner. Okay, so God, why not just punish Adam and Eve and it's done? No more sin. We punish the two that committed the sin. They've paid their debt by being punished with pains and death, and they eventually die. And after that, okay, the slate's clean now because it was only one sin committed. But instead, God doesn't do that. No, that would make too much sense. What does He do? I'm going to make every person born from here into eternity a sinner. I'm going to pass a sinful nature down to all of them. Yeah, this makes no sense because one man ate a piece of fruit. Now you're going to punish everybody else who will exist on earth. Uh, this is baffling. This is equal to you commit a crime. You got a squeaky clean record, okay? Squeaky clean. All right. You've never been in any trouble. Outstanding, upright citizen, law-abiding, tax-paying citizen. Okay. Never been in any trouble. And one day you drink alcohol and drive. You get pulled over, and now you're charged with a DUI. And you go to jail. But the judge says the sentence is you'll serve life in prison. But not only that, every family member in your family will also serve life and be classified a felon, and every person who will ever be born in your family. Because you broke the law this one time, I'm going to punish them forever. It makes no sense. That's not justice. That's not righteous. That doesn't even make sense. It defies common sense. But this is exactly what God did. And so the whole need for redemption, the whole need for Jesus to come in the New Testament is because God decided to carry this sin into perpetuity. All right, forever. And so man needed to be redeemed from the sin that he could have just punished the one time it was committed and let it be, but instead he chose to now make that the nature of man forever. You don't see a problem with this? Come on, you guys who believe this book to be the holy writ of God, even one of us imbeciles would have more sense than this. You know, this would not even make sense to us. Why in the world who would ever think to do such a thing? One offense was committed by one person, and I'm saying one person because there was no punishment, there was no sin committed until Adam ate of the fruit. When Eve ate, notice there was no intervention by God, there was no punishment brought down. It was only when Adam ate. All right. And then again, back to the scripture that I was talking about in Hebrews, it say, for by one man sin entered the world. When he ate, that's when it was a sin. So one man sinned one time, and because of that, I'm going to punish everybody else who will ever be born. This is utterly ridiculous. This is biblical nonsense. And I hope you can see my point. Okay. All right. So the bigger issue with sin, it's not its retarded genesis. All right. The bigger issue that I take is that now everyone else who's born is born a sinner. They're born in sin and they're born with a sinful nature. Go back to Romans 7, where Paul's talking, and he said, there is no good thing within my flesh. Nothing's good in this body. Nothing. Its nature is evil. Its nature is wicked. Its nature is sinful. That's a lot of self hate. So, this is my issue with sin. It's a lot of self hate. You have to believe that you are completely unworthy because your very nature, your very essence is evil. So, if you were born in a lab somewhere, isolated from society and any human interaction. You've never been introduced to the opposite sex. You know nothing about sex, about lust, about greed. You've never been introduced to any of those things. You are still sinful if you believe this paradigm. I don't. I don't. I think it's utterly ridiculous. It is nonsense. It's ludicrous that someone would believe that they are by nature, they're inherently evil. And unless some celestial deity redeems them and gives them a new nature, they'll forever be evil. And even then, even even though, so here's the confusing thing about Jesus. What was his point in coming? Well, people would say his whole point was to redeem us from sin. He died once for sin, according to Hebrews, when they start talking about the preeminence and the weight, the finality behind the sacrifice of Jesus in comparison to the animals which were sacrificed in the Old Testament. They talk about how the animals in the Old Testament had to be offered every year. But Jesus died once for sin, and that's the final sacrifice. So his sacrifice was said to be final. That's it. It's no more sin. His sacrifice did away with it. Nothing else has to be done to redeem one from sin. It is finished. That's what Jesus said on the cross, right? It is finished. It's kaput. He nipped it in the bud. So why do people still have to repent for sin? Why is there still punishment for sin? If he conquered it on the cross, if the whole point of the sacrifice was to be offered for the sins of the world in the past, present, and future, the final sacrifice, the only thing that ever needed to be done, what's the point in asking for forgiveness for sin? I like to know your opinion on it. Let me know in the comments. Hit that like button. Uh, this makes no sense to me, because now people are still prostrating themselves before God, talking about how unworthy and unrighteous they are because they're sinners, but yet if the sacrifice of Christ is what you say it is, then there's no need for that, right? It's been conquered. It's over. Mazel tov. Let's celebrate. Uh, but that's not the case. So I have a lot of problems with sin. But one thing that I want to suggest to you is that sin is none of those things. It's not the drinking, it's not smoking, it's not partying, it's not fornication, it's not homosexuality, it's not any of these things that the Bible lays out, and that the pastor, the bishop, the ecclesia, the theologian, it's none of the stuff that they say it is. So what is sin? Paul gives us a hint. If you keep reading after Romans 7, keep reading Romans 8, 9, 10, keep reading, right? Paul is going to say, what shall separate me from God? Is it height? Not height, nor depth, nor width. He goes through all of this. The one thing that separates one from God was sin. Sin itself is separation from God. If God is omnipotent, if he's omniscient, he's ubiquitous, he's everywhere at once, how can you ever be separate from him? Paul, again, says, in him do we move, live, and have our existence. One of says Colossians that says, all things consist in him. So if everything is in him, then how can anything be separate from him? So if sin is to be separate from God, but according to your theology, it's impossible to be separate from him because everything is in him, it makes no sense unless your theology is wrong. Unless this celestial being lives in a celestial realm and does not intervene, interact, or indwell the material world, the physical world. If he's not in this, and this is not in him, he's an entity with a specific locale. He's not the pantheistic God. He's just a being in a place. Then it's possible to be separate from him. If, and this is my belief, that God or the Father is spirit. And if you believe the Bible, you believe that. In John, the Bible says that God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. God is a spirit, not all spirit. He's a spirit. He's one of many. All right. So if God is spirit, the Father is spirit, then the mother is matter. When you do the etymology on the word, the origins of the word mother comes from the word matter. Ah, now we're starting to see. Now it's coming together. Now those gears are clicking, are turning. If the mother, the cosmic mother, is matter, all things physical, and the Father is spirit, to be separate from the Father is to be present with the mother. The woman was the one who introduced the Father to the fruit and caused the division. Notice Joseph disappears once Jesus is born. He's nowhere to be found. Jesus is left with the mother. This is significant because it's that one story that I've been telling you that is told over and over again in all religions. The deity enters the realm of matter, separating itself from the Father. This is the story of the prodigal son. This is the story of Jonah. This is the story of Joseph, of Moses. This story goes on and on. It's always retold. Different names, different people, different places, same story. Jesus is left with Mary in matter. Mary and Jesus them goes down to Egypt. Egypt is the world, the earth, our earth, this world, its existence. And shortly thereafter, Joseph leaves. All right. This is sin. Sin is to be separate from the Father. When the deities came down into humankind, that was the one and only sin that could ever be committed. To separate yourself from spirit and to be entangled in matter. That's all sin is. When these deities decided to come down into matter, and in some texts we'll get into at a later time, you'll see they were actually instructed to do so by God, to come down into matter, to raise the consciousness of mankind. All right, so they were instructed to sin by God. And you'll say, well, God never instructs anyone to sin, so this can't be true. Oh, does he? Does he not? Have you read the Old Testament? Just curious. If you've read the Old Testament, then you know that one of the sins, according to Christians, the Old Testament, the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not kill. Has God ever instructed anyone to kill? I'll wait. Wasn't it God who sent 2 she-bears to devour 42 children for making fun of the prophet Isaiah? Wasn't it God who told the armies of Joshua to destroy all of the people in the city? The men, the women, the children, and the animal? To kill them all and leave none alive? And we talked about the story that's in Samuel and also in Chronicles. In one version, it says that God told David to number the children of Israel. Numbering the children of Israel was a sin, but God told him to do it. So throughout the Bible, we have examples of God telling people to sin. God instructs them to enter the bodies of humans, to place their power inside of human beings, the spark of divinity inside of human beings, and to raise the consciousness of human beings, to help them to ascend. And this was considered death to the deity. Once the deity entered the body of a person, the deity is said to have died. Its energy is being siphoned off, the life is being sucked out of it by the human vessel which it is inside of. Once the human dies, the deity is resurrected again. It's born again, resurrected with all of its power. Remember, this is what was said happened to Jesus. Remember the famous "Can a man be born again" story where he talks to Nicodemus about rebirth. Remember, Jesus is said to have risen with all power in his hand after he was freed from the physical body that he was trapped inside of. The only sin was the sin committed by deity, by the divine, when it decided to enter into matter. This is the sin of the virgin birth, of the immaculate conception. This is the sin of a deity impregnating its own mother. The mother was matter. So if the spirit impregnates its mother, which is matter, a sin has been committed. Let one lay with his mother, and it is incest. Even so, cosmically and celestially, when spirit enters, penetrates, impregnates matter, it is a sin, and it is the only sin that can be committed. So sins cannot be committed by humans. Sin can only be committed against God by gods. There you have it. Sin in a nutshell. So now you can liberate yourself. No more guilt and shame, no more burden, no more shackle, no more weight, no more unworthiness, unrighteousness, sulliedness. Now we're all worthy, and those bastards are the one who have sinned. This has been the Deck Talking Devil. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Hit that like button, subscribe, turn on the notifications so the next time there's a new video, you'll be the first to know. Until next time, keep thinking, my friend.